Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that the most consequential geopolitical speech of 2026 was undelivered by Trump at his anniversary rally, wasn't proclaimed by Putin from the Kremlin, or issued by Xi Jinping from Beijing, but was instead spoken by a former central banker in the Swiss Alps, calmly announcing that Canada is no longer willing to be America's economic satellite? And what if this moment fundamentally reshapes the global order for the next 50 years? For decades, Canada has been defined by what we are not. We are not American, though we share the longest undefended border in the world. We are not European, though we carry their constitutional traditions. We are not Asian, though our Pacific coastline ties us to the world's most dynamic economies. This perpetual middle position has been both our strength and our weakness, allowing us to play the role of the helpful mediator, the reliable partner, the polite neighbor who never rocks the boat too hard. But on January 20th, 2026, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before global elites at Davos and declared that the age of Canadian deference is over. His words were measured, his tone professional, but the message was revolutionary. The old order is not coming back, he said, looking directly into the cameras. We should not mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. This was not just a speech, it was a declaration of independence from the assumption that has defined Canadian foreign policy since World War II, that our prosperity and security depend on staying in America's good graces. To understand why this moment matters, we must strip away the diplomatic niceties and examine what Carney actually said, and more importantly, what he didn't say. For those of us who have watched Canada navigate great power politics for decades, this speech represents a seismic shift in how we see ourselves and our place in the world. Before we dive deeper into this historic address, if you are finding this analysis valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue to produce in-depth geopolitical analysis like this. Let's begin with the context. Carney was not speaking in a vacuum. Hours before his address, Trump had posted AI-generated images showing the American flag draped over Canada, Greenland, and Venezuela. The timing was deliberate. While Trump was engaging in digital cartography, claiming territories through social media, Carney was in Beijing announcing a trade deal that would allow 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into Canada. The juxtaposition was devastating. Trump's America was asserting dominance through fantasy maps. Carney's Canada was building real relationships and securing tangible economic benefits. One leader was playing to his base with provocative imagery. The other was quietly reshaping the global supply chain. When Carney took the stage in Davos, he opened with a line historians will remember, "Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition." This was not diplomatic hedging. This was someone who had concluded that the global system was fundamentally broken. He continued, "Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited." Anyone listening knew exactly who he meant. He never mentioned Trump by name, but every sentence was a carefully crafted indictment of America First policies. But Carney wasn't just criticizing, he was prescribing. "When we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon," he said, "we negotiate from weakness. This is not sovereignty. It's the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination." This line represents a fundamental break with 70 years of Canadian foreign policy doctrine. Since World War II, Canada's approach has been built on leveraging our special relationship with Washington to punch above our weight globally. We were America's interpreter to the world, and the world's interpreter to America. Carney was saying, this model is not just outdated, it's dangerous. In a world where American foreign policy swings wildly based on electoral cycles and presidential personalities relying on bilateral negotiations with Washington, is strategic vulnerability. His alternative was elegant. If we're not at the table, we're on the menu. Canada needed to build coalitions of middle powers that could collectively negotiate with great powers from strength. Rather than being isolated, supplicants begging for favors, countries like Canada could band together to create values-based realism. This concept deserves attention because it represents a sophisticated attempt to thread an impossible needle. Canadian foreign policy has been torn between standing up for human rights, democracy, and rule of law, while needing to do business with authoritarian regimes and navigate practical realities of a world where power often trumps principles. Traditional realism says values are a luxury middle powers cannot afford. Traditional idealism says compromising with dictators makes you complicit. Carney's values-based realism attempts a third way. Engage with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, but do so in a way that gradually moves the system toward democracy, transparency, and accountability. This was not theoretical. Even as he spoke, Carney was implementing this philosophy through Canada's strategic partnership with China. Critics denounced this as capitulation to authoritarianism, but Carney's calculation was sophisticated. By engaging with China on specific limited issues, climate change, agricultural trade, clean technology, Canada could build leverage for later addressing areas where our values clash. Moreover, by demonstrating that Canada had alternatives to American partnership, Carney was strengthening Canada's negotiating position with the United States. For 80 years, American policymakers assumed Canada had nowhere else to go. If Ottawa complained too loudly, Washington could wait us out, knowing geographic and economic realities would force us back to the table. That assumption is no longer valid. Canada's new partnership with China, combined with expanded trade relationships with the EU, Japan, South Korea, and ASEAN nations, means the United States is no longer Canada's only option. As Carney put it in Beijing, Canada's relationship with China has become more predictable than its relationship with the United States. This was perhaps the most devastating line in Carney's entire diplomatic offensive. By describing China as more predictable than America, he highlighted the fundamental problem with American leadership in the Trump era: radical unpredictability. Alliance partners cannot build long-term strategies around a country whose policies shift dramatically every 4 years, where trade agreements can be torn up on a whim. China, for all its authoritarianism, offers something America increasingly cannot: consistency. When Beijing makes a trade deal, it honors the terms. Chinese leaders follow through on commitments. They may be brutally self-interested, but they are reliably self-interested. In a volatile world, reliability becomes premium. Carney was not abandoning the democratic world or embracing Chinese authoritarianism. His speech made clear that Canada remains committed to democracy, human rights, and rule of law. But he was arguing for a more sophisticated approach, recognizing that promoting democracy requires engaging with non-democratic actors. The speech then turned to what Carney called the architecture of resistance. His vision for how middle powers could band together to create a parallel international system, operating independently of both American hegemony and Chinese authoritarianism. The first pillar is economic diversification. Rather than depending on trade with a single dominant partner, middle powers should build robust relationships with multiple regions. For Canada, this means reducing export dependence on the United States from 75% to below 60% within a decade. This is not about abandoning the American market, which will always be important, but about creating alternatives that give us genuine choices. The second pillar is technological sovereignty. Canada would invest heavily in critical mineral processing, clean energy infrastructure, and advanced manufacturing. The goal? Ensuring Canada controls the entire value chain for future technologies, rather than simply extracting raw materials for processing elsewhere. This directly challenges the traditional colonial model that has defined the Canadian economy for centuries. Instead of being hewers of wood and drawers of water, Canada would become a hub for the green industrial revolution. Our vast hydroelectric resources, combined with mineral wealth and technical expertise, position us as a critical player in the global transition to clean energy. The third pillar is coalition sovereignty. Canada would build coalitions with like-minded countries sharing similar challenges. He specifically mentioned bridging the Trans-Pacific Partnership and European Union, creating a trading bloc of 1.5 billion people with combined GDP exceeding $45 trillion, large enough to negotiate as equals with either superpower, diverse enough to withstand economic pressure from either. But the most significant part was what Carney said about the Arctic. Canada stands firmly with Greenland and Denmark, he declared, and their unique right to determine Greenland's future. This was as close as any Canadian Prime Minister has come to directly confronting American territorial ambitions. By backing Denmark's sovereignty over Greenland against Trump's acquisition campaign, Carney was drawing a red line in Arctic ice. He was saying Canada would not stand idly by while the United States attempted to redraw the Arctic map through economic coercion. Carney announced Canada would open a new consulate in Greenland and declared the Arctic Canada Eskimo's top foreign policy priority. This wasn't symbolic. It was strategic commitment to defend Arctic sovereignty against American expansionism. The implications cannot be overstated. The Arctic is rapidly becoming Earth's most important strategic theater. Climate change is opening shipping routes, revealing mineral deposits, creating new development possibilities. Arctic control will likely determine global power balance in the second half of the 21st century. For decades, Canada has approached Arctic sovereignty with polite diffidence. We made claims, planted flags, sent occasional naval patrols, but never really asserted ourselves as a dominant Arctic power. Carney's speech marked the end of that era. Canada would no longer be content to play a supporting role in Arctic affairs. We would be a leader. I want to pause here and ask you, do you believe Canada has the capacity to actually lead in the Arctic, or is this ambitious overreach that could backfire? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. The domestic implications are equally significant. For the first time in modern Canadian history, we have a Prime Minister explicitly arguing that Canada's prosperity and security do not depend on maintaining a special relationship with the United States. This shift is visible in Canada's defense spending approach. The government committed to reaching NATO's 2% GDP target by 2027, but more importantly, is restructuring how that money is spent. Rather than buying American weapons and integrating into American command structures, Canada is investing in sovereign defense capabilities. The new Arctic patrol ships, submarine program, advanced fighter aircraft purchase, these are designed to give Canada independent operational capability in its own territory. The goal, ensuring Canada can defend its sovereignty without relying on American military assistance. This isn't about becoming anti-American. Canada and America will always be neighbors with deeply integrated economies. But Carney argues for a relationship of equals rather than dependence. He wants Canada to negotiate from strength with genuine alternatives and real leverage rather than simply hoping for American goodwill. The international reaction has been revealing. European leaders have been quietly supportive, seeing Canada as a valuable partner in building strategic autonomy from American hegemony. Asian countries view Canada as a potential bridge between Western democracies and Pacific rising powers. Washington's reaction has been complex. Officially, they welcomed Canada's commitment to democracy and multilateralism. Privately, however, American officials worry about the implications of Carney's coalition building. If middle powers start banding together to negotiate collectively with the United States, it fundamentally changes the international power balance. Trump's reaction was characteristically erratic, endorsing Canada's China trade deal while posting territorial maps showing Canada as part of America. This incoherence strengthened Carney's argument that the United States is no longer reliable. Xi Jinping's endorsement of Carney's New World Order language wasn't accidental. Beijing sees Canada's pivot as an opportunity to divide the Western alliance and create cracks in American hegemony. They are more than happy to support Canada's independence from American influence. This creates a delicate balancing act for Canada. We want to use our China relationship to create leverage with the United States, but don't want to become a Chinese client state. We want to maintain democratic values while doing business in an increasingly authoritarian world. Success depends on Canada's ability to build genuine alternatives to both American and Chinese partnership. This is where coalition building becomes crucial. A Canada-EU-Japan-Australia partnership could potentially match either superpower economically while maintaining democratic governance and respect for human rights. Building such coalitions requires sustained effort and considerable diplomatic skill. It means overcoming decades of habit and assumption. It means convincing countries that have traditionally looked to the United States for leadership that there is a viable alternative. It means proving that middle powers can effectively coordinate their policies and present a united front to the great powers. Early signs are encouraging. Canada's trade relationships with non-American partners have been growing rapidly. Our diplomatic initiatives in the Arctic, Indo-Pacific, and Europe have been well received. Our commitment to multilateralism and international law has been welcomed by countries frustrated with American unilateralism and Chinese authoritarianism. However, there are also significant risks. If Carney's coalition-building efforts fail, Canada could find itself isolated between hostile great powers, with neither American alliance protection nor Chinese economic benefits. If diversification efforts don't succeed, we could end up poorer and less secure than when we started. There are legitimate questions about whether Canadian voters will support this approach long term. Canadians have grown comfortable with American security guarantees and economic partnership. Building genuine independence requires sacrifice, investment, and patience. It's unclear that Canadian democracy can sustain such long-term thinking, especially if short-term costs are high. But Carney's bet is that Canadians are ready for this challenge. His speech wasn't just directed at international audiences. It was a message to Canadians that we have the capability and opportunity to be more than America's junior partner. We can be a leader in our own right, a country that shapes global affairs rather than simply responding to them. This is where coalition building becomes crucial. A Canada, EU, Japan, Australia partnership could potentially match either superpower economically while maintaining democratic governance. The ultimate test comes in July 2026 when Canada, the United States, and Mexico review the USMCA trade agreement. Trump expects to find a weakened Canada desperate for concessions. Instead, he may find a Canada that has built alternatives, diversified relationships, and strengthened independent capabilities. If Carney's strategy succeeds, Canada will negotiate as an equal rather than a supplicant. We will be able to say, we want free trade, we want to be partners, but we do not need to be subjects. This brings us to the broader implications of what we might call the Carney Doctrine. If successful, this approach could provide a model for how middle powers navigate the new multipolar world. Rather than being forced to choose between competing great powers, middle powers could build coalitions that allow them to maintain independence and pursue their own interests. This could fundamentally reshape the international system. Instead of bipolar competition between the United States, In China, we could see emergence of multiple power centers, each representing different approaches to governance and development. A successful Canada-led middle power coalition could represent democratic capitalism as distinct from both American hegemony and Chinese authoritarianism. Climate change implications are equally significant. Global cooperation on this scale has never been achieved. The current system of great power competition makes such cooperation extremely difficult. A coalition of middle powers committed to aggressive climate action could potentially break the deadlock and drive global progress on this existential challenge. If you are finding this analysis of Canada's strategic transformation valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue bringing you these in-depth examinations of the forces reshaping our world. The Arctic dimension adds another layer of complexity and opportunity. As the region becomes more accessible due to climate change, it will become a critical theater for global competition. Canada's approach of emphasizing Indigenous rights, environmental protection, and multilateral cooperation could provide an alternative to the militaristic approaches being pursued by both the United States and Russia. By positioning Canada as the reasonable alternative, the democratic option, the country that can be trusted to develop the Arctic responsibly, Carney is making a bid for Arctic leadership that goes well beyond Canada's current capabilities. This leadership role extends beyond territorial claims to championing a rules-based approach to Arctic development. The environmental implications cannot be ignored. The Arctic is warming faster than anywhere else on Earth. Since 1979, we have seen a reduction in sea ice of over 2.6 million square kilometers. While we must address the environmental gravity of this, we must also be clear-eyed about the geopolitical reality. The ice is melting. The shipping routes are opening. The question is not whether the Arctic will become a major arena of great power competition, but who will set the rules for that competition. Russia has known this for years. They have aggressively remilitarized their Arctic coast, reopening Soviet-era bases, testing hypersonic missiles in the Barents Sea, and building a fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers that dwarfs the combined fleets of the West. They view the northern sea route along their coast as their personal toll road for shipping between Asia and Europe. China, despite being 1,400 kilometers away from the Arctic Circle, has declared itself a near-Arctic state. This is a fabricated term with no basis in international law, yet they use it to justify their presence. They are building icebreakers and investing in mining projects in Greenland. They envision a polar Silk Road where Chinese goods flow over the top of the world to Europe and North America. Against this backdrop, Carney's positioning of Canada as the champion of democratic Arctic development takes on profound significance. We are not just claiming territory, we are claiming moral authority to lead a rules-based approach that respects both environmental limits and Indigenous sovereignty. This represents a fundamental shift from Canada's historically passive approach to Arctic affairs. For decades, we made claims and sent the occasional naval patrol, but never really asserted ourselves as a dominant Arctic power. Carney's speech marked the end of that era. Canada would no longer be content to play a supporting role in Arctic affairs. We would be a leader, setting the terms for how the Arctic develops, rather than simply responding to the initiatives of others. The implications for global governance are profound. If Canada can successfully lead a coalition of middle powers in both Arctic development and climate action, it could provide a model for addressing other global challenges that require unprecedented levels of international cooperation. From pandemic preparedness to space governance, the challenges of the 21st century require exactly the kind of multilateral values-based approach that Carney is proposing. But success is not guaranteed. If Carney's vision fails, Canada could find itself isolated. The stakes are indeed very high. Friends, we are witnessing something remarkable, the emergence of Canada as a truly independent actor on the world stage. For the first time since Confederation, we are pursuing a foreign policy not fundamentally derivative of either British or American leadership. We are charting our own course, building our own relationships, defining our own interests. This is not without risk. Independence is always more dangerous than dependence. But it also offers the possibility of genuine sovereignty, of being able to shape your own destiny rather than having it determined by others. Carney's Davos speech was not just a policy address. It was a coming-of-age moment for Canada, when we stopped being content to play a supporting role and decided to be the protagonist of our own story. The success is not guaranteed. Building coalitions is hard. Diversifying economic relationships takes time. There will be setbacks and moments when old dependence looks attractive. But for those who believe Canada has potential to be more than a resource-rich American appendage, Carney's vision offers hope. It suggests that a country of 40 million people, blessed with vast resources and democratic institutions, can find a way to matter in a world of giants. The old order is not coming back. Canada, working with like-minded partners, can help build a new order based on cooperation rather than domination, on multilateralism rather than unilateralism. Whether this vision succeeds will determine not just Canada's future, but the world our children inherit. The age of Canadian strategic autonomy has begun. Thank you.